About a year ago, I started to make a research on internet because I started to think that maybe I'm a missing child. I felt in my life that something is wrong here because my mother didn't hug me, didn't say I love you, so it was a little suspicious to me. I started to ask my mother some questions about pictures from being pregnant and some documents like birth certificate. She always changed the subject. Every child in my country, in Poland, should have child health book, and my child health book, pages 0 to 6, they're blank. When I started to think that I could be Madeleine, I called to the Polish embassy. I called to English embassy. Nobody listened. I decided to create this Instagram and try to use the power of social media. I really think that I could be Madeleine.
There are stories that shake the world not only because of the tragedy they carry, but because of the mysteries they refuse to let go of. Madeline McCann's disappearance in 2007 was one such event, a case that gripped headlines, haunted families, and left investigators chasing shadows for nearly 2 decades. The haunting image of the 3-year-old British girl, gone without a trace from a holiday resort in Portugal, has never left the public consciousness. And then, years later, a new chapter emerged, not from evidence, but from the voice of a young woman who claimed she might be Madeline herself. In 2023, a 23-year-old woman from Poland named Julia Wendell shook the internet with a shocking claim that she was the missing child the world had been searching for. With photos, videos, and an uncanny resemblance, she launched a digital storm that spiraled across Instagram, talk shows, and newspapers worldwide. Some saw her as a desperate young woman seeking truth about her identity. Others condemned her as a manipulator exploiting a grieving family. But what lies beneath her extraordinary assertion? Was Julia truly convinced she was Madeline? Or was this a tragic cry for attention, fueled by trauma, loneliness, and untreated mental health struggles? Tonight, we dive deep into Julia Wendell's story, her childhood, her battles with identity, the global uproar she unleashed, and the devastating consequences that followed. This is not just a tale about one woman and one missing child. It's a reflection of our digital age, where truth, trauma, and obsession collide in ways both riveting and terrifying. Julia Wendell was born in 2002 in Wrocław, a picturesque city in western Poland, known for its vibrant culture and charming market squares. On the surface, her life seemed stable and ordinary. Her mother, Dorota, owned a fashionable clothing boutique that catered to stylish locals, and her stepfather, Piotr, worked in finance, providing the family with a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. They lived in a quiet neighborhood filled with modern homes and tree-lined streets, a setting that painted the image of a secure, happy childhood. Family trips to Poland's Baltic coast and visits to bustling city squares suggested the picture of a close-knit family. Yet, behind this polished exterior, cracks were forming. Julia, an only child, began to feel emotionally disconnected from her family. While her parents provided material comfort and stability, Julia often expressed that she felt unloved, overlooked, or somehow misplaced. She would later claim that her mother never showed her the affection she longed for, no hugs, no words of love, leaving her with a sense that something fundamental was missing. At school, Julia displayed intelligence and curiosity, excelling in literature and history. Teachers described her as quiet, reserved, and often lost in her own world. While classmates socialized during breaks, Julia preferred solitude, her nose buried in books. By her early teens, signs of rebellion began to emerge. She argued frequently with her parents over trivial matters, but beneath those arguments was something deeper, a haunting feeling that she didn't truly belong. This sense of alienation grew stronger when Julia began to suspect she had been adopted. At around 14 years old, she became consumed by the idea. She searched through family documents, photo albums, and medical records looking for proof, but every piece of evidence confirmed her parents' story. She was their biological child. Her birth certificate, childhood photos, and medical history all pointed clearly to her being Dorota's daughter. Yet, Julia refused to believe it. Her doubts created a widening rift in the family. Conversations at home turned into heated arguments, with Julia accusing her mother of hiding the truth about her origins. Dorota and Piotr tried to reassure her, but Julia's suspicions only deepened. What her parents dismissed as teenage angst grew into an obsession, one that would shape the trajectory of her life and eventually thrust her into the center of an international controversy. What appeared to the outside world as a stable, ordinary childhood was, for Julia, a source of confusion and pain. It was in these years that the seeds of her later claims were planted, a growing conviction that she did not truly belong to the family raising her. Julia's adolescence was marked by emotional turbulence that went far beyond the ordinary struggles of teenage years. At the age of 13, she was diagnosed with depression. Her parents arranged therapy sessions, hoping professional help would ease the growing storm inside her. Psychologists noted her mood swings, her bursts of anger, and her difficulty trusting others. While Julia was intelligent and introspective, she often sat in silence during sessions, refusing to share the full weight of her thoughts. For a time, therapy provided a lifeline, but as she grew older, she began to resist it, eventually abandoning treatment altogether. The cracks in her emotional world widened. Julia confided to close friends and later to the public that she had suffered sexual abuse during childhood. Though details remained unclear, she insisted that these experiences left her with fragmented and foggy memories. She described disjointed images of unfamiliar faces and fleeting recollections of a beach, a place she later tied, perhaps unconsciously, to the disappearance of Madeline McCann. These gaps in memory created confusion so deep that she questioned the very foundation of her identity. Her mother and stepfather continued to insist that she was their biological daughter, but Julia's growing sense of estrangement made their assurances meaningless. She often said she felt like a puzzle missing its most important pieces. Even as her family tried to provide proof through birth certificates, medical records, and photographs, Julia's mind twisted the evidence into further doubts. To her, the absence of emotional warmth from her mother became its own form of proof that she did not truly belong. Adding to this turmoil were hints of physical health concerns. Julia's family spoke of possible signs of cancer, yet she dismissed these warnings, refusing medical evaluation just as she rejected psychological treatment. It was as though acknowledging these vulnerabilities would force her to confront a reality she couldn't bear. Instead, she built alternate narratives, stories in which her pain and disconnection had an external cause. Psychologists have explained that trauma, especially when left untreated, can distort memory and perception. Survivors sometimes construct alternate identities or narratives as a way to explain their suffering. In Julia's case, her untreated depression, her sense of alienation, and her painful memories combined into a powerful conviction that she was not who her family claimed she was. The normal world around her, the boutique owned by her mother, the steady presence of her stepfather, the classrooms where she excelled academically, no longer felt real. By the time she reached her late teens, Julia's struggle for identity had become an obsession. The emotional void inside her demanded answers, and when none came from her family, she turned outward, searching for meaning in the wider world. That search would soon collide with one of the most famous missing persons cases in history, transforming her private pain into a public storm. In February 2023, Julia Wendell took a step that would thrust her into international headlines. She created an Instagram account under the startling name, I am Madeline McCann. With that declaration, she ignited one of the most controversial social media storms of the decade. Her posts featured side-by-side photographs, her own face compared with images of the missing British child. She pointed to supposed similarities: the rare coloboma in her eye, the shape of her nose, the faint moles near her mouth. Captions carried a mixture of desperate pleas and cryptic fragments of memory, mentions of a beach, feelings of being lost, flashes of unfamiliar people. Within weeks, tens of thousands of followers were drawn in, either captivated by her story or horrified by what they saw as cruel exploitation of a family's grief. The McCann case had haunted the world since 2007, when 3-year-old Madeleine vanished from a holiday resort in Praia da Luz, Portugal, while her parents dined nearby. Despite countless investigations, tips, and even reported sightings, no conclusive evidence of her fate ever emerged. For some, Julia's resemblance felt like the first real lead in years. Supporters flooded her comments with encouragement. "You deserve to be heard. Don't give up. The truth will come out." But others were relentless in their criticism. Julia was accused of being an imposter, an attention seeker, or worse, a manipulator exploiting the pain of Kate and Jerry McCann. Online attacks escalated to the point of death threats, forcing Julia to deactivate her first account by March 2023. Her claim gained even greater visibility when she appeared on the American talk show Dr. Phil. Seated alongside private investigator Dr. Fia Johansson, Julia spoke passionately about her suspicions, her fragmented memories, and the void in her sense of identity. Millions watched as she explained why she believed she might be Madeline. For a moment, her story had the veneer of legitimacy. Yet, science delivered a decisive blow. DNA testing proved that Julia was not Madeline McCann. Her genetic heritage tied her firmly to her Polish family. Still, Julia refused to accept the results. Instead of retreating into silence, she doubled down. In 2024, she launched another account under the name Am I Julia Wendell, shifting the narrative but keeping the spotlight fixed on herself. The backlash was fierce, but so was the loyalty of a small circle of followers who believed her, or at least sympathized with her struggle. For Julia, the validation from strangers online seemed more powerful than the reassurances of her family. The more she was criticized, the more determined she became to press her claims. By now, the story was no longer just about whether she could be Madeline. It had become about Julia herself, a young woman caught in a cycle of trauma, public attention, and a desperate search for belonging. But this search would soon take a darker turn, one that crossed legal lines and brought unimaginable pain back to the McCann family. By 2024, Julia Wendell's fixation had moved beyond Instagram posts and television appearances. What began as a personal quest for identity had morphed into a relentless campaign that would devastate an already grieving family. From January 2024 onward, Julia bombarded the McCanns with messages. She reached out to Kate and Jerry, and even to their twins, Sean and Amelie, through phone calls, WhatsApp messages, Instagram posts, and voicemails. Authorities later described her communications as incessant, emotionally charged, and deeply distressing. In one message, she pleaded desperately to be recognized. In another, she accused the McCanns of hiding the truth about who she really was. This cycle of hope and accusation left the family shaken. But Julia's obsession did not stop at messages. Twice in 2024, on May the 2nd and December 7th, she allegedly appeared uninvited at the McCann home in Rothley, Leicestershire. Reports suggest she even attempted to record audio during her visits. For a family that had already endured unimaginable pain since Madeline's disappearance in 2007, these intrusions were deeply alarming. The McCanns had worked for years to protect their surviving children from the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Now, Julia's actions ripped open old wounds, reigniting trauma they had tried so hard to contain. The Leicestershire police stepped in, documenting Julia's actions as crossing the legal boundary into stalking under the Protection from Harassment Act of 1997. Court documents later revealed the extent of the harm. The family's sense of safety was shattered, their privacy violated, their grief exploited all over again. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some who had once sympathized with Julia now turned against her, condemning her for tormenting a family that had already lost so much. Headlines painted her as a stalker, an intruder, a dangerous reminder of how unchecked obsession could destroy lives. Others, however, clung to the belief that she was a troubled young woman acting out of psychological pain, not malice. A victim of her own delusions rather than a villain. For the McCanns, though, the effect was undeniable. Nearly 2 decades had passed since that night in Portugal when their daughter vanished. In those years, they had endured countless false leads, cruel hoaxes, and invasive speculation. Julia's relentless campaign was not just another distraction, it was a fresh assault on their fragile peace. Sean and Amelie, no longer children but young adults, found their lives once again dragged into a nightmare they had never escaped. Julia's refusal to let go, despite DNA evidence and pleas from her family in Poland, revealed the depth of her fixation. What might have begun as a search for belonging had spiraled into harassment, leaving devastation in its wake. And soon, the law would catch up with her, transforming her story from a media spectacle into a criminal case that would play out in the courtroom. On February 21st, 2025, the story that had begun with an Instagram account reached a dramatic new stage. Julia Wendell was arrested at Bristol Airport, England. What had once been dismissed by some as the confused claims of a troubled young woman was now a criminal matter, rooted in stalking charges that carried the weight of law. She was formally accused of harassing 4 members of the McCann family, Kate, Jerry, and their twins, Sean and Amelie, between January 2024 and February 2025. The charges cited the distress her messages, calls, and uninvited visits had caused, meeting the criteria for stalking under the Protection from Harassment Act of 1997. A serious offense, it carried the potential for up to 7 years in prison. The arrest was not only about Julia. Alongside her, police also detained a 60-year-old woman from Cardiff named Karen Spragg, who allegedly assisted Julia in her campaign. Spragg was accused of aiding her efforts, providing information, perhaps logistical support, even encouraging contact with the McCanns. Her role added an unexpected twist, suggesting that Julia's obsession had drawn others into her orbit. In March 2025, Spragg appeared at Leicester Magistrates Court, confirming her identity, but entering no plea. She was released on conditional bail, barred from contacting the McCanns or entering certain areas. Julia, however, remained in custody. Her detention reflected the severity of her alleged actions and the impact on the victims. Julia's preliminary hearing took place at Leicester Crown Court on April 7, 2025. Appearing via video link from prison, she gave no indication of her plea. Prosecutors laid out the scale of her conduct, the relentless nature of her communications, the visits to the McCann's home, and the profound distress inflicted on the family. Judge Timothy Spencer imposed restrictions on reporting bail details, a sign of how sensitive and high-profile the case had become. Her trial was scheduled for October 2025. If convicted, she faced the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. The media seized on the courtroom drama, filling headlines around the world. Madeline McCann, imposter charged with stalking, blared tabloids. More measured outlets like The Guardian and Sky News emphasized the suffering of the McCann family, while others questioned whether Julia's behavior was the product of untreated mental illness. Public opinion fractured once more. Some saw her arrest as long overdue justice, a necessary step to protect the McCanns from continued torment. Others expressed sorrow, viewing Julia as a woman broken by trauma and delusion, whose cries for help had spiraled into criminality. What was undeniable, however, was that the spectacle had shifted. Julia was no longer just a viral curiosity or a figure on daytime television. She was now a defendant facing the full weight of the law. And as the world waited for her trial, one question loomed: would the court see her as a dangerous stalker or as a lost soul consumed by trauma and obsession? The arrest of Julia Wendell was more than the fall of one troubled young woman. It was a stark reminder of how trauma, obsession, and the digital age can collide with devastating consequences. For the McCann family, nearly 2 decades of grief had already scarred their lives. Julia's campaign of messages, accusations, and uninvited visits reopened wounds that had never healed, forcing them once again into the public spotlight they had desperately tried to escape. Their surviving children, Sean and Amelie, now young adults, had to endure their family's pain being dragged through headlines yet again. For society, Julia's saga raised urgent questions. What responsibility do we hold when unverified claims go viral? How should the media balance public interest with compassion for victims? And what does it mean when someone's personal trauma becomes entertainment for millions? Social media had given Julia a global platform, transforming her private doubts into a public storm. Likes, shares, and sensational headlines amplified her narrative, even after DNA evidence proved it false. The very tools meant to connect us became weapons that magnified harm. Psychologists pointed out that Julia's actions bore the hallmarks of untreated trauma and possible dissociative disorder. Her fragmented memories, her sense of disconnection from her family, and her refusal of therapy created fertile ground for delusional beliefs. In her mind, the Madeline McCann case became a vessel to pour her confusion and pain into. Supporters argued she needed help, not condemnation. Critics countered that, regardless of her suffering, the damage she inflicted on the McCanns was intolerable. Both views revealed a difficult truth. Empathy for one person cannot erase the suffering of another. At its core, Julia's story is a cautionary tale of what happens when deep personal wounds remain unhealed. Without intervention, her search for identity spiraled into obsession, her cry for belonging into criminal harassment. Her case stands as a reflection of our time, where the line between reality and narrative blurs, and where digital validation can both uplift and destroy. For the McCanns, the hope remains that someday the mystery of their daughter's disappearance will be resolved, not through false claims or public spectacle, but through truth. For the rest of us, Julia's story urges a more sobering lesson: to treat trauma with seriousness, to hold media and social platforms accountable, and to recognize the human cost when speculation overshadows compassion. In the end, Julia Wendell's journey is not just about her or Madeline. It is about all of us, about the dangers of silence around mental health, about the ripple effects of trauma, and about the need to approach even the most sensational stories with care. Because behind every headline lies a human being, and every human being carries a story more fragile than we might ever imagine.